I think that if you are working on a website and that website as an app, I think they can work really well together. I think, SEO will kind of like fuel the discovery. And then, like I was saying, ASO really like ensures probably conversion and hopefully retention of the user. And I think they can really work for like, a sustainable growth of the business overall. Yes, I think that's the main takeaway, I would say. I'm Filipa Serra Gaspar, and this is SEO in 2026.
Beautiful. What's your number one SEO tip for 2026?
My number one SEO tip for 2026 is ASO, App Store Optimization. So, now, mainly with the AI era, let's say, it is really important, obviously, to be good positioned not only on the traditional search engines, but a bit like everywhere on the web, LLMs and everything. And I'm talking about ASO because I think, app stores should not be left behind.
Okay, poor app stores, yes. So are you saying that SEOs can learn things from App Store optimization, or are you saying that SEOs should be doing App Store optimization as part of their activities?
Exactly. I think SEOs should be doing ASO as part of their activities. Of course, it only applies if, the website that you are working on also as an app. If you don't have an app, then you cannot really do it. But if you do have an app, that's something that you should be looking at 100%. Yes.
Okay, and I guess should businesses create an app based upon the fact that it's an additional ranking opportunity to actually drive traffic into your brand, into your ecosystem, or you shouldn't create an app just for the sake of it?
Yeah, no, I mean, I guess it really depends in, which area your website is. So, for example, I've been working mainly with e-commerces, and I would say the benefits are quite big on having an app. But again, it really depends on, which area you are operating. It really depends, SEO's favorite answer. It depends. I guess you shouldn't do an app just for the sake of it, obviously, only if it really makes sense for the business.
And I guess we're talking about Apple and Android as probably the main places to have an app.
Exactly. So there are thousands of app stores out there, but in the end, the ones that we work on the most is definitely App Store Connect for Apple and Android. Yes, Google Play Store, Android.
Okay, so if a business says to an SEO, okay, we're going to launch an app, do you know anything about how to get as much traffic to it as possible initially? What's best practice initially for that SEO to do?
So I mean, it all starts a bit like in SEO. It all starts with a bit of like auditing and also competitor analysis. That's like pretty much the same as you do in SEO, but of course, the analysis that you do is different because you have to do it on the app stores, right? There are also, specialized tools that, can really give you an analysis and an overview on both of the app stores. I'm talking both because it's like I said before.
Feel free to name any specialized tools if you like.
Yeah. Well, I personally use a lot Uptweak, which for me is really good for auditing, for example, and to look at competitors because it can give you a really good overview of what your competitors are doing, which keywords they are using, and so on. And then you can also do the keyword research, but it is a particular keyword research because, of course, the way users search on app stores is completely different from the way they search on traditional search engines like Google.
Well, why is that? Why is that different?
The type of keywords. So if you do a keyword research for, exactly the same website slash app, you will see the results are very different because, just the way that you search for things, usually on app, users are more likely to search for just one word or two words, really the type of app that they are looking for. Yeah, the behavior is really, really different, which is really interesting to see. And even if you look at the results on a keyword research on Android and iOS, they are different even between, both app stores, which is really curious to see. And it's really, really nice. So it's really important to have in mind that users do not only look, for things really different on the app stores. And even between the two, you can see significant differences as well.
So how do you do keyword research for app stores?
So again, I also use, I mean, there's several tools out there. I personally like a lot Uptweak, which is the one I know the best. And basically, you can search for keywords just like you could look in any other tool, like, I don't know, SEMrush or Ahrefs and so on, right?
So that gives data for the Apple App Store and for Android, as well as data for traditional search engines like Google.
No, the tool that I'm using and the one that I'm speaking about will give you only for the app stores. So, let's say on the traditional SEO tools, you will get like an average search volume. And on these app tools, let's say you actually get a number that goes from 0 to 100. So it's not actually an average search volume, it's more like it compares one keyword with the other and it gives you like an estimation between 0 and 100. So I cannot really know the average of users that look for it. I can only see, within the range, it goes from 0 to 100. Yes.
Okay, brilliant. And one other key aspect of optimizing for app stores is optimizing visual assets, icons, screenshots, things like that. So, what's bad practice and what's good practice?
Yes. So that's one thing that you also have to work on ASO for sure. That goes, the screenshots that you are showing on the app, the app icon, and even the videos. For that, of course, I work, with, graphic designers or, motion designers that do those graphics. But of course, there are a lot of best practices that you can apply. But again, there is not one formula like, one fits all. So doing app store optimization, we really are encouraged to do A/B testing all the time and to pretty much test, what can work best, in terms of the color of the background, for example, of the screenshot, the font that you are using, also the CTAs that are present on the screenshots. The best way is to really try A/B test and see what, the results are and what the outcome is.
Okay, and what software would you use to A/B split test that, though, or is it just a case of making changes to your app and then tracking changes over time?
So you can actually do the A/B tests directly on the, Apple and Android. They have these platforms that, as app store optimization specialist, let's say, you can log in and do the A/B testing directly there. So it's like somehow a Google Search Console kind of thing, but that allows you to also change stuff directly, like also the metadata. So, the title, the subtitle, the description of the app, as well as everything related to the visuals and screenshots, icon, and so on. Yes.
So, what are the biggest mistakes that brands tend to make with their apps? Maybe naming the images or something else. If you're asked to actually have a look at an app to see how well it is optimized, what will you typically pick out as a mistake?
I mean, as a first look, let's say, you can definitely look at, how they have their title, for example, because you have a limit of characters. And I don't know, maybe a lot of apps only have the app name and that's it. So usually it is advised that besides the app name, you also use certain keywords that will fit within the limit that is allowed. For example, that could be one thing. And then also, if you are actually using the right keywords on the title, on the description, and everything else.
And is it perfectly okay to incorporate a keyword phrase within the title of an app? Because I've made a lot of podcast submissions to Apple Podcasts, for example, and I know that some submissions get rejected if you get a little bit too targeted with keyword phrases. So what they want is they want the title to reflect the actual name of the podcast or obviously the product.
Well, I personally never had a rejection with the name. So usually they actually allow the keywords as long as it's, related to the app, of course. But it is true that I often face a lot of rejection as well, mainly on the visual side. When it comes to text and title and everything like that, I never actually got a rejection, but I did get a lot of rejections on visuals and stuff like that. Yes.
So what kind of visuals do these app stores not like then and might get rejected?
It depends again. The rules do not apply equally on Android and iOS. So the rules are also slightly different. But usually if you are very like targeting, price discounts, promotions, and this kind of information, it is most likely to get rejected, for example. And, it really has to showcase the app experience and not, don't be too commercial, basically, really showcase what it is about and don't be like, oh, I don't know, things like best prices, best offers are really usually, yeah, rejected, I would say.
What about reviews and ratings? How important are they?
Yes, they are extremely important. Obviously, it is not something that you can control directly, let's say, but also you can reply to them and they can actually play quite a big, I think, role because, when users are on the, your app profile, let's say, they can often see the reviews and that can be, sometimes the decision whether to download it or not. They are important, yes.
Should you encourage people to write reviews? Should they happen organically? And is it important to have a certain number of reviews and ratings that are fresh on a regular basis?
I wouldn't say it is like a, for example, a ranking factor directly, but I think it in the end it really affects conversion rate, and then it's like a snowball in the end. Like just like in SEO, I would say you can encourage users to give you a review. Pretty much, it would work. I don't know, similarly like leaving a review on a Google business profile. So I would say it works similarly, and you can always encourage users to yes to leave your review through like a banner on the app or something like that to actually rate the app itself.
So, what KPIs do you track on a regular basis to test whether or not your app is as successful as it might be?
So I would say that, as we have in SEO, the traffic and the clicks that we receive, I would say that the equivalent to that are probably the app installs, which is like the ultimate goal of, App Store optimization, ASO. Of course, then conversion rate can also play a big role, mainly when we are doing, A/B testing. But I would say the ultimate goal would be, the app installs. That's what we are looking for. Let's say that's like the traffic of SEO would be the app installs of ASO.
Is it possible to combine both App Store optimization and SEO?
You can perhaps create, I don't know, landing pages, SEO landing pages that, give incentives to the user to download the app, some sort of like, web to app funnel. They cannot be, directly related, but at the same time, they can help each other, I would say, Also, because I think that sometimes SEO is really good to attract traffic, and probably ASO is good more on the like retention side because users that have your app tend to be more faithful. I don't know if that's the right word. So I think they can definitely be combined and they can help each other a lot. Yeah, definitely.
Sounds good. Okay. And is there a best place to actually ask for someone to download an app? Because I was on a website recently and trying to buy something, and every single time I tried to buy something, I just wanted to use the mobile site. They said, you have to download the app. You have to download the app to actually make the purchase. And it was just infuriating because if you experience a website for the first time, you perhaps want to actually buy using their mobile site or their desktop site, whatever, to begin with. And then if you had a good experience and you were considering repurchasing from them in the future, then you'd be willing to download the app. So when do you know when to ask them to download the app without annoying that consumer?
Yeah, that's true. Sometimes, if you are very pushy to the user, that can be like you are saying, like you experienced, a bit annoying. I guess it really depends. Of course, that often a lot of e-commerces tend to do even like first app order discounts, exclusive discounts to really like make you wanna download the app. But at the same time, you know, the website is worked to also work very well on the, on a mobile without the need of downloading the app. But I wouldn't know when would be the right time. It really depends also, which type of business and how often do usually the user would buy something if we are talking about e-commerce, of course. But that's a tricky question. I actually wouldn't know when would be the best timing. I wouldn't know how to say like, yeah, exactly.
Filipa, what's the key takeaway from the tip you shared today?
I think that if you are working on a website and that website as an app, I think they can work really well together. I think, SEO will kind of like fuel the discovery. And then, like I was saying, ASO really like ensures probably conversion and hopefully retention of the user. And I think they can really work for like, a sustainable growth of the business overall. Yes, I think that's the main takeaway, I would say.
Filipa Serra Gaspar is an SEO and ASO manager at Zooplus. Find out more over at SEOlipa.com. Filipa, thanks so much for being part of SEO in 2026.
Thank you.
I've been your host, David Bain. Get your copy of SEO in 2026, the book, over at SEOin2026.com.